So this is the second day of our Global Young Academy Conference with the topic Heal the Earth. And this is our session on diminishing resources and environmental sustainability. It's just when the decade of action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals begins. The COVID-19 has disrupted the world. Climate change, biodiversity loss, health systems, and disrupting economies, social disintegration could be worsening by the response to the pandemic. We need to act now towards fulfilling the SDGs in time amidst this global health challenge and help to ensure the purpose of the 2030 agenda is being realized. The biggest lesson that COVID-19 is more than an illness. It's a symptom, it's a global health challenge of our planet. Humanity's dysfunctional relationship with nature has caused this wider disease. And understanding the root of this is critical if we want to rise stronger after the crisis. COVID-19 is a zoonotic virus, meaning that it spilled over from wild animals to humans and evolved into a pandemic due to now well-established risk cocktails of the 21st century. Ecosystem destruction, species loss, global warming, colliding with a risky human behavior like illegal wildlife trade. All of this has played out a globalized network of trade and travel problems. Therefore, young scientists, especially and scientists globally, are equipped and committed to help tackle these threats. This e-conference gathered together the members of Global Young Academy, scientists and scholars from 6 continents, with international professionals and stakeholders to lead evidence-based, interdisciplinary and intergenerational dialogue on the topic Heal the Earth, Sustainable Development Goals in a Changing World. In line with the Global Sustainable Development Report, we call upon businesses, government, funders, academics, NGOs, multilateral agencies, and other stakeholders to take meaningful and transformative steps to meet the goals. We outline what, from a young and global perspective, are the key challenges and recommend our commitments to solve them. So I would like to introduce our panel today, and first of all, the moderators. Myself, I'm Sasha Kagansky. I'm a molecular biologist by training and leading a Center for Genomic and Regenerative Medicine in the University of Vladivostok in Russia. But now I'm spread across disciplines and moving between Russia and UK in order to try and set up the community that was allowed by my 5 years in Global Young Academy that is called Bio to Bio, which means biodiversity for biomedicine. And Alex Godoy is a director of Sustainability Research Center and Strategic Resource Management and academic director of master's program in Sustainability Management at School of Engineering at Universidad del Desarrollo and research associate in the Water Research Center of Agriculture and Mining, awarded in 5th National Competition of Research Centers in Priority Areas of National Commission for Scientific and Technological Transfer. And Felix Moronta is working on biosafety group of the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology in Trieste, Italy. His background as a researcher in microbiology and bacterial genetics provided him with the key skills for his current role. Also, intensive training on science advice and science diplomacy have empowered him to do this task. And he is also a co-founder of NGO for Science Communication Foundation, Persea. So with that, we would like to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Flavia Schlegel, who has had a distinguished international career, which included positions at UNESCO and as a deputy director and as science diplomat in Washington, DC and Shanghai in China. And currently, she took up a new position as a special envoy for science in global policy and the International Science Council. So there's a long list of achievements we could cite. She's a holder of a medical doctorate in 1992 from Zurich, and she worked at the Swiss Federal Office of Public Health in Bern. And we would like to give now the word to Flavia and let her do her keynote presentation. Thanks, Flavia, for joining.
Well, thank you, Alexander, Alex, and Felix for moderating this important panel. Hello to all of you out there, maybe early in the morning or late in the evening, as we are probably distributed across the globe. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you this afternoon on diminishing resources and environmental issues now in the light of COVID-19. But first of all, I would like to congratulate Global Young Academy for organizing this conference, for responding swiftly, obviously, to COVID-19, for organizing this conference virtually. So also keeping up the dialogue and the international cooperation. I think this is more important than ever. And if you're lucky to have access to instruments like Zoom, we should also use it. So thanks for that. I would also like to say, Alexander mentioned it, that I'm the special envoy for science and global policy for the International Science Council. And I'm very happy that Global Young Academies over the last year now has also become a member of ISC. ISC has over 150 members from around 140 countries. So it's very important to have this voice of the young academies in that debate as well. And I hope you're all well and safe wherever you are, your families, your friends as well. And we're all looking sort of like with lots of concerns into the future, which has been impacted heavily by COVID-19. Now, within the next few minutes, I will not go, and I say this from the beginning, into the technical details or the disciplinary details of the challenges you're now exposing here, Alexander, in your opening remarks. But what I would like to do is sort of like to frame the global situation, the global context, and context I think is very relevant. I will come back to that. So the global situation, the global space where your deliberations on diminishing resources and sustainability, environmentally, economically, socially are taking place. And I think COVID-19, I mean, from all its dramatic and tragic impact, it is also an extreme highlighter of the inequalities we're facing in the world, which we have not managed to overcome over the last decades. And it also shows inequalities, but it also shows the intersectorality of the responses we need to tackle COVID-19 and other sustainability issues. And I will come back to both. When I say context, I'd like to actually cover three areas. One is really just briefly the global context, and Alexander, you already alluded to that. I'd like to talk about the context of science systems, and you as young scientists are working in a science system nationally, regionally, and obviously also globally. And then also the context of science interacting with other parts of society, be it the private sector or, for example, policymakers, when we try to also to shape policies as we're doing now as scientists also for COVID-19. Just coming firstly to the current context now globally, I think, and you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, Alexander, the global agenda is out there rather clearly, and I'm referring to, because that's also part of my background at UNESCO, to the UN Development Agenda with the 2030 Agenda, with the Sustainable Development Goals, but also with the Paris Agreement on Climate Action. I'm not going to go into all the details. I think if you know, that's okay, and if you don't, then please go and read it up. I think it's really important to have those global agendas somewhat on the horizon when doing your science. Obviously, the knowledge, I guess, particularly when it comes to resources and the environment, is there on the table. I mean, we have IPCC reports, we have IPBES on biodiversity, we have the Human Development Report. So I think we have synthesis and assessment of current knowledge on where we are, where the gaps are, where the challenges are, and how we should act on that. We should act now. You mentioned that decade, 2020, the big UN year for that decade to 2030. But then obviously it needs politics and political will to act up on that knowledge. I think what all these agendas say, and again, COVID-19 highlights this, is that all challenges are interconnected. Also, when you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, these are not standalone goals. There are somewhat all interconnected. This is also, and this is also why I think the SDGs are a progress vis-a-vis the MDGs. The MDGs were very much centered on the humans, but the SDGs are now centered on the humans, on the environment, and on economic advancement. And also here you see an interconnected agenda. You also you see a multi-science agenda. So we're not only talking about the natural sciences, for example, for the environment, we're also talking about the social sciences, the economic sciences, and the humanities. So the challenges are interconnected and they're systemic. And you see that also with COVID-19, obviously, in the different situations we find around the globe. It's not only a medical issue, it's not only a health issue. It will not be solved just by one magic bullet, which might be a vaccine. It has impact on all areas, on education, on transport, on the way we live, on the way we earn money. So it is a systemic, multi-sectoral issue. And I think this is nowadays, when we enter the science system, in disciplinary science, absolutely crucial to be aware of. That I think all the big challenges, all the big questions are interconnected and there are multi-sectoral. A last remark on the global context is about limits and boundaries. And I think this is what you're also alluding to with your topic of diminishing resources. And I would just like to highlight two concepts briefly. One is the one on planetary boundaries, as designed now 10 years ago by Rockström and the Stockholm Resilience Center, where it's clearly exposed, and I think there is now global agreement, that there are obviously limitations to our natural resources on the planet. And this is not only about water, this is also about air quality and other things, but there are clear limitations. There will be an end to the natural resources if we go on consuming like that. And linked to that concept of planetary resource boundaries is where Kate Raworth comes in with her donut economics, where she says, well, there are actually social needs around the globe, and every human being should have the right to actually cover his or her needs fully. But that need can only be covered within the boundaries of our natural resources. So we have to somewhat reconcile the social needs of people, and we will have more and more people on the planet within these limitations of natural resources. So there are a few tough choices. We cannot avoid it. There will be trade-offs, obviously, which we'll have to face and which we also have to counter. And I think that's also going to be a huge challenge, obviously, for the science system. I mean, what it also shows is that, for example, when you look at Kate Raworth's concept on donut economy, that we're also in contradiction to the neoclassical economic models of individual satisfaction, of shareholder values, and so on, where sort of like the economics are isolated from the impact on the environment or also impact on disadvantaged communications. And this neoclassical approach also to economics, I think that's one which we also see when we look, and that's the second context I'd like to touch upon briefly, the science systems which we are working in right now, or which you have entered now just shortly, or maybe already some time ago. The science system, as we know it right now, has been dominated over the last 100 or 150 years by a few countries. countries. So even if the science system is a global enterprise, the dominant forces and voices are not all countries around the globe. There are a few countries which have influenced that system heavily. And we also see that the system, while being rather successful and obviously solving many issues, have not managed that the science system in itself is evenly distributed, that all countries have capacities, being universities or human capacities, that not all communities have access, for example, to knowledge production or access to the use of knowledge. There is very much also a power game, a hierarchy within the science system, which we will have to overcome if the science system really has to provide or should provide answers to the challenges which we're facing, for example, the diminishing resources and the growing social need which we have of people, particularly when we want to now close the gap which are highlighted in such a dramatic manner by COVID-19. The science system, obviously, what I think the positive sides are is really the emphasis on independence, on freedom. But then these are two attributes which are not obviously given to the sciences around the globe. I mean, we have very many countries where sciences are not free. They are, obviously, governments are influencing heavy on science agenda, or scientists who would like to speak freely are being hindered. And you see this also with COVID-19 from east to west. If the politician, the president, doesn't like what the science is saying, they're either disregarding, diminishing, or denigrating the sciences. And I think this is something which we also have to be aware of, that you can be as rigorous as you are, as integral as you are, as long as the political ecosystem will not accept freedom and independence of science, then this will be very hard, sort of like, to put your knowledge which you are producing at its best use. I think this is also where organizations like the Global Young Academy or the International Science Council are so important, because you're not just defending the individual discipline. I mean, you're also speaking out for the importance for the independence and the freedom of scientists, or you're supporting young scientists which are not in circumstances or political frameworks where this is possible. With COVID-19, you obviously also see that the science system has to produce knowledge now under high pressure. I mean, everybody wants the treatment now, and everybody wants the vaccine now, hopefully evenly distributed across the globe. And you will also see that there is not one confirmed knowledge. Obviously, every week, actually, we learn more from previous research, and we're adding to this. So this is an evolving body of knowledge, and we cannot say that's it now. It's obviously growing, and it's moving, and it will be changing, which might be confusing, particularly to politicians, but that's the reality. And I think this is also where open science has to come in, and open access, so that we can make sure that what you produce is open to almost everybody, or is open to everybody, that what actually your data can be verified or falsified by other scientists or experts as well. The issue we have right now, and I'm not going to go now into open access and the publishing arena, because that's a whole story of itself, but what we see in the science system, that the whole peer review system, I think, will have to be transformed as well, particularly when knowledge is being produced as quickly as right now, and the traditional peer review system just don't work because they are not quick enough. But this obviously also relates to the issue of, and I think as a young scientist, a very difficult question about integrity and responsibility. That even if you're focusing on one very specialized disciplinary questions, that you are aware of the fact that whatever you do in this, if I call it negatively, silo, has actually an impact and a connection to some other knowledge, so that you are aware that there is an interface between what you're actually producing and what somebody else produces. With the responsibility, I'm also talking about one is not only a scientist, one is also a political human being. You are a human being and you are a scientist. And as this, I think, I'm deeply convinced that we obviously also have a responsibility to speak out appropriately, obviously through the appropriate processes. But I have the impression that more and more sciences and scientists have to take a stand. They have to say what is the case, what do we know now, and where are the gaps. And we cannot just remain in our labs and think, well, I'm producing knowledge and somebody else is taking a decision. I think we have to participate in that dialogue. And this brings me to the topic again in the science system of alternative news, misinformation, fake news, the discreditation. Particularly now in your topic, and I will be interested in looking at the outcomes of your panel now. I mean, we're looking at climate change, at natural resources. So obviously there is huge economic interest in the exploitation of those natural resources. So some private sector business, a fossil fuel industry, 20 years ago it was the tobacco industry, they might actually not like what the science is saying, that we should actually turn around, transform, for example, from fossil fuel to zero emission economies. And I think Naomi Oreskes, with her book, Merchants of Doubt, has shown it that we have to be aware as scientists that out there are different interests and that you can actually encounter as a scientist very aggressive campaigns by the private sector against what science is saying. And again, I say that tobacco was a great example where so many scientists actually lost their careers because they were denigrated, their careers were destroyed by money coming from the private sector. Now, I'm not saying that the private sector in general is bad, but I think as scientists, we have to be aware that out there is a world outside of the science system where we obviously have very strong interests, which sometimes are defended by irresponsible means. And I think we have to be aware of that. And we have to be aware and we have to be capable to make a difference between doubts and questions to the science we're producing, which come from very reliable and credible sources. And when sometimes doubts, particularly now also in climate change / fossil fuel questions, when these doubts are driven by just shareholder value interests. And I think and are limiting the progress towards the 2030 agenda. And with this, I'd like to come to the third context. The first one was obviously the global context. The second one now the science system itself. And the third one is the context of science reaching out to, as I just mentioned, the private sector, but also the society at large. And I think this is of particular interest also to academies, to policymakers. And there again, I think that the issue of trust is an important one, that science can be produced in a society or in a societal ecosystem where in general there is trust towards the sciences. And when I look at COVID-19 right now, I'm not so much worried about lack of trust of society in their science or their scientists. I think it's looking pretty good, but we will have to see what social sciences are telling us. But I don't think there is an overall mistrust of the general population in sciences. We have much more an issue, I guess, is in trust in policy making, that whatever the science is saying, and it has its limitation because we don't know too much yet about COVID-19. How is that translated into policy making? And when we see the actions of a few of the presidents or the prime ministers around the world, obviously you're really asking yourself, what the hell are these people doing? I mean, or what pressures are they responding to? And again, I come back to the economic interests, and not only economic interests now of large multinational companies. I mean, it's also, and I guess you all know in your village or city or region, small businesses which had to close down, people who lost their job due to COVID-19. So that economic interest is a very, very valid one. But how you balance the knowledge we have about COVID-19, and I myself, I'm a medical doctor, I have a career also in infectious diseases. COVID-19, yes, it is asking for closing borders, because that's how you actually can slow down or stop the virus. But then on the other hand, that should not lead to renationalization of issues of closing borders because of maybe right-wing or nationalistic political agenda. The borders should be closed as long as it is necessary for scientific and epidemiological reasons. But in that interface between the scientists and policymakers, that's a very sensitive interface, obviously, and we can see that in COVID-19. It is also very sensitive because most of these decisions should or could not only be taken within one country. And again, this is why I also think it's so important to have a global young academy, because it gives us the opportunity also as scientists to go beyond my national idea, looking at the region or the global impact of that COVID-19 and the global science response to the different needs around the globe. So this interface is very sensitive, it's very difficult. And I guess as a scientist, I don't think that every scientist has to have the skills and experience in that interface. I think that would overburden a single scientist. But I think we all have to be aware that if our knowledge is not being brought to some kind of policy making process, which means it's not relevant to a community or potential beneficiaries. And if we cannot convey that knowledge in an appropriate manner, either directly or through brokers, I think then we have a major challenge. And I think this is also what you see now with the resource debate and environmental debate. I mean, the knowledge has been around for a very, very long time. But it somewhat, and IPCC has done, I think, a great job in synthesizing and trying to communicate, to explain, not only in hardcore scientific language, but in a language which can be understood. But at some point in time, we needed something like Climate Youth and Friday for Futures to really sort of like get out of this obviously a bit limited debate, a space of debate into society. We needed that strong voice, which actually just said, why don't you listen to scientists? But here, and this is my second last point, we obviously also have to be humble that science is only one part of society. And as I said, there are many other interests, and we have to be, as global citizens, very much aware that science is one voice. And we see it now with the lockdown exits in very many countries. I think many scientists would not completely agree with what is being done, but obviously there is also pressure from economy, but also from citizens who just feel limited in their personal freedom, for example, limitation of movement, or just plainly not being able to go to work and earn money. So we have to be humble as scientists that whatever we have as knowledge might actually not be taken fully into account. The last point I would like to make now, looking at the three contexts, global science systems, anti-science, policy science, society interfaces, I think is career options of young scientists. I think there are a few difficult or challenging decisions to make. Why? Because, as I said, these challenges we have ahead of us with the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, are interconnected, they are systemic. We need lots of interdisciplinarity. One silo just doesn't cut the cake. And we need probably more and more also transdisciplinary approaches. We have to be able to reach out to the communities, to the potential beneficiaries from the beginning, from the conceptualization of our research work. But I'm not sure at your universities, do you have a chair or a professor for transdisciplinarity? Have you heard about a Nobel laureate for interdisciplinary work? The major funders, obviously, of science, I mean, they're grappling with the current situation as well, but are they really investing in trans and interdisciplinarity? Can you build your career on investing, again, in cross-cutting issue, then in transdisciplinary issue? Is that rewarded? At your universities or institutions you're working, are there the appropriate incentives? So I still think we are, as I mentioned earlier, working as, or you are working as young scientists in science, in an academic system, which has been built by the past and now has to transform towards the future. And also here, a few tough choices have to be made. And I think you can be a driving force for this transformation, but it might infringe for the time being on your academic career as we know it by now, or on the business as usual, to which we don't want to go back. With this, I'd like to close my few remarks. I hope I could somewhat elaborate, obviously not completely and fully, on the global space where you're talking about diminishing resources and environmental sustainability. And again, I'm stressing the point that context is absolutely crucial, that one size doesn't fit all, even if everything is interconnected. And just maybe as a last remark now is that I guess in 50 to 100 years, we are going to live in a very, very different world anyway. Whether we remain on the trajectory we're right now on, we don't do anything at all. If the world is going to be 3 to 5 degrees warmer by the end of this century, it will completely different around the globe, in the north, in the south, and everywhere. But it will also be a very different world if we try now to go carbon neutral around the globe, and there are different responsibilities, obviously, between 2030 and 2050. So whatever we do, the current situation will not remain the same. It will be a very different world whether we try to transform and to be more sustainable so all needs of all people can be covered, or if we just sort of like give up and we don't do anything, it will also be a very different world. So I guess it's really up to us to take that decision. Do we try to make this transformation, to take the chance to improve, or are we sort of like leaning back and taking care of our scientific career and just see where it goes? I think it's clear we should try to make a difference, to transform. And I think it's also in all generations' hands. So the pressure should not only be on you, on younger scientists, but also on the older scientists to make sure that we have the tools across the globe in the science system to provide the appropriate knowledge. So with this, I'm looking forward to your reflections, the results of your panel, and thanks again for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Flavia. It was a great talk, and it's a great pleasure to hear the comments. And on the behalf of Global Young Academy, I would like to stress that this interdisciplinary the solutions is the goal of Global Young Academy. So for your council, we are ready to provide you know, this help. We are trying to train as many young scientists who can answer these challenges that you mentioned as possible. And with that, I would like to say that we have a lot of questions already to your talk, and maybe we will make them available for you after most of them, because we don't have time to present you with all of the talks. I would like Alex Godoy to choose one question from the list of questions for you, and then we can move on to present other distinguished speakers. Thank you very much.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Flavia. It's really honored and listen to your presentation, specific because you are talking about the transdisciplinarity research and what is the connection between interdisciplinary research and the new challenge for the future. And here I have one question from the Robert Lepenies. Is what's your hope for organizations like International Science Council and GYA having an impact at the high-level political forum? That it's at the international political level. What should GYA do for the upcoming high-level political forum in July, for example?
Yeah, very good question. And I mean, you're at the heart of the global debate and the UN system, and at this science policy interface I just mentioned. I think there is a two-folded response. I think I strongly believe in multilateral systems, obviously, and as flawed as the UN system might be, I think it's the best one we have, and we have to invest in it, and we have to invest honestly and appropriately. On the other hand, it's also, I mean, occasions like the high-level political forum or the UN General Assembly, very crowded spaces. I mean, there's so many voices out there. I think what is very important is alliances and partnerships. So don't try to do it yourself. And that's the same for ISC, and it's for Global Young Academies, it's for IAP, and all these other organizations. I think the more we are, the stronger our alliance is, the stronger is also our voice. And I think a second point is that it's good to have another report, another statement, but what we really need is action. So where can ISC or Global Young Academy make a difference also on the ground? So we can say as long as we want that ID and TD, inter and transdisciplinarity are important. But what we actually, I think, have to prove is that we will produce better knowledge, or knowledge will make a different impact than before. And for example, the ISC is investing in a program which is called Transformations to Sustainability, where we exactly try to build skills in ID or TD in the Global South. So I still think the political message is very important, but the action and the impact is as important as well, so that somebody else also speaks up for the Global Young Academy making such a difference. And maybe the last point is certainly about, and I guess that's for all academy or membership organization, and it's the same for ISC as well, to raise awareness among the members, to really make the case that member organizations or individual members do understand what is the importance of being a scientist today and what is the difference in career trajectory. I guess we need this critical mass of scientists who do believe in sustainability sciences, for example, in transformative pathways, and who are ready to invest their time and their career into these issues. Now, I know this is not a completely satisfying response to your question, but I would say it's a smart balance between politically astute, to have the good messages out there, but also be action messages which are actionable and will make a difference on the ground.
Thank you, Flavia. I would like to join two questions because they are related. Ignacio Palomo and Martin Dominic asked two related things. Ignacio said, Giving the equity is a fundamental pillar of the SDGs, and which the last COVID-19 crisis has hit hard. How can multilateral organizations, such as those from the United Nations, contribute to it in a world that seems to drift to regionalization? And I would like to think and link another question is, can the upcoming UNESCO recommendation on open science play a role in building a globally equitable research system?
Well, excellent questions again, and right into the global context here. I mean, equity and equality, I think, are really the two cross-cutting issues now, both with Sustainable Development Agenda, which we will have to rethink as well, as Alexander mentioned in the opening remarks. We'll not be able to get there, I guess, by 2030. But there obviously also COVID-19 really highlights the different inequalities and the gaps we have regionally or gender, or you can just name it. Yes, I think the multilateral organization have an important role to play, because we do need governance mechanisms which are supranational. All these questions cannot be solved just by one country. And I think that's really also the great thing about the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. That's not only for the North giving money to the South to do something better. No, the North has to do something differently as well. So every country has a responsibility. The issue with the multilateral organizations, they're only as good as their members. I think we tend to overestimate New York, Geneva, Nairobi a little bit. The UN Secretary General, obviously great honorable job, but his playing field is limited by the votes and the decision of member states. So I think this is very important, and that's a tricky part of a global young academy and an international science council as well. How do you bring these important messages also into your countries? How can you anchor them nationally so that nations actually give the multilateral system a different playing field or more freedom, where equality, equity, the importance of human rights, you could actually look at the COVID-19 question and sustainable development just through the human rights lens as well. And you would come up with the same results in terms of the need for transformation. I think the open science document coming out from UNESCO could be a great instrument if it's used appropriately by organizations like Global Young Academy, the international sciences, and put into action by member states. I'm not sure whether you are aware of the UNESCO recommendations for the freedom and responsibility of science and scientific researchers. It's an outstanding document. approved 2017. Together, these two documents, for me personally, cover more or less all the major governance issues we have with the global science system. But if nobody reads them, if nobody advocates for them, if nobody raises awareness for these documents and what difference they could make and how they could be implemented, it will be very difficult. And I think this is an important role also for Global Young Academy, to raise awareness among your members, because you will actually be the ones who will be deciding over the next 10 to 20 years, to raise awareness, to make sure that it's understood how that could be translated into concrete action. And particularly with the open sciences, again, there are great alliances possible with the different regions in Africa, the African Open Science Platform, the EU initiative of open science. I mean, there are very many partners around, so don't try to do it yourself. I would say, let's try to forge strong partnership, to advocate, to raise awareness, and to put them into action.
Thanks, Flavia. There are two connected questions. One is about from Anindita. She's a co-chair of the Global Young Academy. She said that COVID-19 is a new disease. And with new research, there is information building up, no? But there is also a race to publish. And we keep seeing new papers every day, and also some controversies and retractions. You know, the resources are limited. The competition is high. Is it ethical to allow this mad rush for COVID-19 research by one and all? How can we weed out and prevent the bad research? And Felix said, how could we influence people, especially from developing countries, who experienced much more problems and worries than climate change and biodiversity, and maybe they're suffering a lot with this healthy crisis, and how this race and how these disparities can affect the research in a global context?
Well, thanks a lot. I mean, really essential and also rather complex, and I guess also in some sense very heavy questions. I mean, the one on publishing, I guess I try to say that yes, we're actually building knowledge by the day, and it's very difficult to verify or falsify that knowledge also by the day. And some are certainly driven by competition in terms of, I want to be the first to come out with that ever-changing news, be it treatment or vaccine. And I think that's what I mean by responsibility and integrity. I think it's very important that we can build the knowledge base together, and that we can build it with the recognition that not every knowledge will be correct, or that we will actually prove later on that our earlier assumptions have to be amended. I mean, this is what science is also all about. I mean, it's producing something, but at the same time also trying to falsify, putting in question, and then come to an agreement. I think, and again, I come back to the science system. I think the incentives are a bit off nowadays. I mean, the metrics for measuring quality of research only, for example, or partly or mostly by the publication index, I think it just doesn't make sense anymore for the 21st century. And I think this is also one of the challenges both for the International Science Council and the Global Young Academy. How can you put into question this very well-established academic system with thick walls of century-old universities, which has produced great knowledge, I agree, and make these walls crumble, make it more transparent, make it more permeable for different kinds of knowledges, and we come back to inter and transdisciplinarity. And I think that's not an easy way. Again, it's a tough choice and we're taking a risk. But COVID-19 shows that we have to rethink, probably together also with publishers, and there are publishers out there who listen, and I think the Global Young Academy has a strong voice there. This is not the way we want to produce and publish knowledge in the future. I think that's a very important point. We can actually use COVID-19 to reiterate that point and to come up maybe also with alternative ideas and modalities. What is a science career in the future? What is publishing? Publishing is not a money-making business. That's not correct. It's not moral. Science should be considered a global public good. And taxpayers should not have to pay for the scientists at the public university and then for using their results. Somebody should not be able to make money out of that. I'm not saying that scientists should not earn a salary, of course. And I'm here only talking about science which is produced in the public sector. I mean, I'm not even touching now the private sector science or knowledge which is produced. But there are fundamental issues where a transformation, I'm not saying a revolution, but where a transformation is absolutely critical also. And I think that was a Felix remark, if I remember correctly. We see the disparities in sciences across the globe. I mean, I'm sitting in Switzerland. Obviously, we have a great science, innovation, technology ecosystem. But even my country, I don't think, is completely fair to all its partners. And obviously, we should share more and more. And this is where we come to the global governance issues again. If we're not tackling these inequalities, and remember there will be different worlds in 50 to 100 years anyway. If we're not going the route to building forward in a more sustainable manner, I don't think that the science system as it is right now will provide the answers that we need actually for the future.
Thank you very much, Flavia. This is a great challenges and potential solutions, and I hope that GYA will work closely to help other organizations within International Science Council to tackle this problem. I think it's a great great moment and great synergy at the moment. So with that, I would like to thank you very much on behalf of Global Young Academy. It was a great session with you, and a lot of questions are remaining, which we may try to share with you, and if you will have time, we will go over your answers in the session that will happen in 2 days. So now I would like to point attention of all our participants that in 2 days, on the 3rd, we will have another Zoom session where we will go over the questions that are arising today. And please be aware of this Google document that you now will see in the Zoom chat, and you will also see it in the Hoover app. So this will be the live document that you will be able to produce more questions and comments. And now I would like to introduce briefly the other speakers. And importantly, there are 4 other panelists that were unable to be live, but they provided their Zoom, their YouTube videos, presentations, which are now being posted as well into the Zoom stream, the chat, and also on this Google Doc, the same as with the questions. So these are very distinguished speakers, and I would like Alex briefly to introduce first of them. There is a stream that has all of the YouTubes, but first of them was invited by Alex, and her name is Thelma Krug. And Alex, please, could you briefly give an
Yes.
intro? Mm-hmm.
Yes, and Thelma Krug is a director of the Department of Policy and Combat Deforestation and Internet in Brazil, and senior researcher, and right now is a vice president and vice chair of the IPCC, and working for the next assessment report. And I'd invite you to see the video because Thelma Krug speaks in 8 minutes about the role of the IPCC and about the IPCC because the IPCC assesses the scientific, technical, and socioeconomic information for climate change, and all information is open, transparent, and objective manner. That the IPCC doesn't not do research, just is a global literature, but it's a very good and a state of the art about the climate change, about the literature, about the policies, and so on. And what she said about the pandemic is disrupting the world of the scientific community. This is a big challenge for the future. And the pandemic is delaying the preparation of scientific research, and the pandemic is damaging the continuity of the climate monitoring. So I'd invite you to see the video because it's very, very interesting, the message of Thelma, like a vice chair of the IPCC. Sasha?
I was muted. Could you, Alex, also please introduce Dr. Joseph Setele, and I will go with the next one, and we will invite the fourth speaker to introduce himself.
Okay, the Professor Joseph Setele, she's the senior scientist at the Helmut Center for Environmental Research, and he born in '61, and from the '93 until 2001. He was deputy head of Department of Conservation Biology and UV Zeta. And right now, since November 2002, he's adjunct professor of general biology and Martin University in Halle. The professor is author and co-author of the more than 300 scientific publications, including 10 books, isolated paper, 8 Science and Nature too. And I invite you to see the video because the Professor Setele talk about the message of the Professor Setele is we have dramatically reconfigured the fabric of life of the planet. He talked about the global extinction rate the last 100 years. He mentioned the land use and how the sea use and the climate change are the 3 most dominant direct drivers of the biodiversity loss. Finally, he talked about the call for action for a transformative change, tracking directly the drivers of the biodiversity loss. A recommendation this video because he's putting on the table the role of the biodiversity and how right now we are suffering a new challenge, the biodiversity loss, and how we can work together to fight against them. Sasha.
Thank you very much. And also, I would like to introduce the speech also on the same YouTube by Harina Nagendra. And she's a professor of sustainability at Azim Premji University. And she wrote a book, Nature in the City, Bengaluru in the Past, Present, and the Future. And her talk is very interesting to see for all, because she touches upon how in modern time the importance of the Global South is rising. Despite most of the publications in the policy come from Global North, it is Global South that is living still largely within with the harmony with nature. People are able to use sustainably the natural cures for diseases, know how the plants grow, how the animals and insects live, and follow more or less the cycles of the planet as it was sustainable for centuries. There is a chance by trying to learn from it and trying to learn from the people living in this very limited conditions in the slums in India, in South America, in Africa, and so on. The Global North could actually learn to regain this ability to live sustainably. So I highly recommend to watch on this talk. And last but not the least, it's our own dear GYA member, Ignacio Palomo, who could introduce himself. His talk is also available on YouTube, but I would like to invite him to speak a few words about it. Ignacio, could you please have a word? I'm unmuting you. He says he's present. He is not. So for the sake of time, I will start by introducing him. So Ignacio is a GYA member, and he's a laureate of the Make Our Planet Great Again prize. And he is based in the University of Grenoble in France. And his research focuses on human-nature interactions, nature-based adaptation to climate change, and transformative adaptation. He has specialized on socio-ecological systems in mountain areas. And he's interested in transdisciplinary science and its impact towards policy relevant targets such as SDGs. Ignacio, are you live now? Not yet. So I will continue. So in addition, Ignacio is part of the Protected Areas Commission of the UN International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. And he published a lot of scientific articles. And so I highly recommend his talk because it's our own GYA member talking on this issue and an example of how GYA can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Yeah. Hello, Ignacio. Can you say a few words? I think the connection is not very well. We can see you, Ignacio, but we barely can hear you. In any case, yeah, I think that the link is overloaded, but there is a video with a lot of good slides from Ignacio on the same YouTube link. And I invite everyone to watch this and comment on the same Google Doc. So I wanted to bring your attention again to this Google Doc with all the questions and comments on the talks. And we will meet to brief and to discuss these questions again after you hopefully have watched the videos by our panelists. And then, so you have until the rest of today and the whole day tomorrow to follow this Google and to work on this with us. And then we will meet again on the 3rd, again on Zoom, and the link will be provided to you. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for this exciting discussion. Especially, I would like to say thanks to Flavia to be in person and everyone who attended our session. And I would like to thank Alex, who has prepared very well for this talk and prepared all the background information. And I let Alex to finish the discussion and pass on thanks to everyone. Alex, can you unmute? I'm trying to unmute you, but it's not working.
I know.
Yes.
There's a few words, and this is my last conference like at GYA. I would like to say thank you for this opportunity to you, Sasha, Felix, and the rest of my colleagues and fellows. And thanks for this amazing panel. And I recommend you see the videos because they are very good videos with a key message for the future. Thank you, GYA. Thanks to you, Sasha and Felix, for all your support. And I hope to see you again, maybe in Tokyo next year.
Okay, thank to you guys. Thank you so much. I step back in the discussion today because connectivity problem, but I'm here with you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Felix. And we will meet again in 2 days again. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.